This is an interview with myself and BJ Campbell. No, I don't interview myself, but it's me interviewing BJ Campbell, who is the author of Hand-Waving Freakoutery blog. He studies various aspects of the culture war, and I guess gun rights is another big issue that he tackles from a systems thinking, data-oriented approach. He's really big into numbers. We don't get too into numbers, but we do investigate the culture war and how the way that media is set up is increasing the likelihood, he thinks, of all-out internecine guns going off in the streets, conflict, and we investigate how to allay that possibility.
I'm an engineer and I'm a nerd, and mostly I stayed in my lane for a very long time, but I'm also a gun owner. And normally I would just kind of sit back in the corner and, share libertarian memes and laugh and drink beer. But, around, I guess, what year is it? 2018, around towards the end of 2017 and beginning of 2018, just the media freakoutery has amplified, by leaps and bounds since the election, the Trump election. And people have started getting a lot more personally hostile and social media and stuff, even with their friends. And, and they started sharing a bunch of articles that were just kind of either objectively wrong or based on bad data or both at the same time. And it was driving me crazy. I felt obligated to keep correcting, over half my friends are liberal and they're all just buying into this media stuff. Mm-hmm. And I got so tiresome that I started saving the same, long corrections so I could just copy paste them into Facebook feeds. Yeah. And then I was like, well, nobody reads those long ones anyway. So then I turned them into Facebook notes. And then people are like, you should make this public so I can share it. And I was like, okay, great. But then they're going to be tied into my personal profile. And so I was like, is there a place I can stick them? So I stuck one up on Medium and I cleaned it up a little bit. And I made the graphs a little bit nicer because I'm a nerd for data visualization. And it sat up there a few days, and then I decided to stick it over on the Libertarian subreddit, and bam, it was disgusting. The thing went viral. So like, holy shit, wow. Mm-hmm. I can click a button and make a little bit of money off this. This is way better than Facebook.
And you're not losing any friends. You're just gaining them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's like I might, if I am losing friends, they're not, at least, they're not telling me about it. So, and then,
and you did a series on gun control, or at least gun statistics.
Yeah, it was 6 or 7 articles, depending on how you want to count them. And I just kind of picked a topic and then dealt with that topic until it was done and moved on and kind of dealt with the next topic. And I was building a case to what I can see. I'm not opposed to changing gun laws, but if they're going to be changed, they need to be changed rationally and based on like reality instead of freakoutery, you know? Mm-hmm. And then by the time I had the thing done, I started looking kind of deeply at the traffic numbers in it. And I had this kind of realization of what was actually going on that had to do with, social media and Facebook and everything. And I just my mind exploded. I was like, oh no, I think I can see kind of what's driving everybody apart here. And so then I started writing about that stuff. Yeah. And, which really is kind of, in order to understand any of that, you've got to come up with some analysis tools to unpack the culture war itself, and then of course those articles got no traffic because nobody wants to read about that. They want to read about guns.
They want to be driven apart. They don't want to know why they're being driven apart.
They want to know why, and they don't want to come back together.
Do you want to dive in a little bit into the current state of the gun debate, or would you like to talk about what's driving us apart?
I think I can't get to the driving us apart part until I tell you how I got to that topic, because I got to run through sort of the stuff that was driving me crazy about guns, and which was really the blue media, because we have blue media and we have red media, and there's very little unbiased media in our space anymore.
I'm not biased.
And
insofar as I'm media.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. People I think everybody probably has their own biases, and our own biases leak in. And I got to be patient to my own biases too. I'm kind of, libertarian popcorn eater in the corner with my tinfoil hat on occasion. It's because that's where it's fun for me to be. But but at the same time, it's like I need to take those biases out. And if I'm going to write about stuff, I want to try and analyze things as cleanly as I can. And so with the gun stuff, I just was like, I'm going to stick to math.
Okay.
And I wrote, I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe depending on your account, maybe now 8 gun articles. And I haven't mentioned the Second Amendment once. I've just been talking about the reality on the ground as not being properly portrayed to anyone. Not on the blue side or on the red side.
Yeah. One of the articles that I read of yours that was really fascinating and educational for me, you talked about this group of people called preppers, like disaster preppers, people who are preparing for the ultimate disaster. And you just run through the math as a statistical, like almost an insurance analysis of like the likelihood in any given lifetime of a major societal breakdown is actually much higher than we think it is. If you just do the math.
Sure.
Like
sure. So
compound interest of cataclysm.
That was my most successful article because it was the one that the Medium editors chose to feature. Mm-hmm. And when I got into this thing, I was under the presumption that they would never choose anything to feature out of anything that I was going to write, because you pretty much got to be, toting a Blue Tribe, backpack to be able to get on the front page of Medium. Yeah. And they picked that one, they put it up there, and I was surprised that was the one they picked too, of any of them that they could have picked. Yeah, I can walk you through that, and then maybe we can go backwards, because that was kind of the end of that was the epilogue kind of the series of articles.
Well, why was it the epilogue then? Was it like a crowning achievement? Was that where you felt you were headed the whole time?
No, because it really, in my mind, it wasn't so much about gun policy. Because to me, the first thing, we need to throw the AR-15 debate out entirely, because rifles of all kinds, like that means every kind of rifle, a bolt-action rifle, a Mauser, a whatever, AR-15 included, deer hunting rifle. All rifles are responsible for, I think it's 0.7% of gun deaths. Okay. I think that's the accurate number. And if I say any numbers in the podcast and they don't exactly line up with what I've put into the articles, go by the article, because I wrote the article, so I was staring at Excel and I was working with the numbers, right? But it's less than 1%, and that's all rifles. So then, homicides with AR-15 rifles are going to be less than that. I guess the third article in the series is called "The Gun Homicide Epidemic Isn't." We don't have a gun homicide epidemic at all right now. We are in, if you do a 5-year running average of homicide rate, overall homicide rate of all kinds, knives, baseball bats, suffocation, guns. If you do a running average of the homicide rate here in the United States over a 5-year period, and you do that math for the entire last century, we are tied for a century low. Okay. Low, not high.
On guns specifically, or homicide?
All homicides. Okay. All homicides. We are under 5 per 100,000 right now. The last time we were that low, the Beatles released Hard Day's Night. It was the 1950s. Huh. Okay, so if we want to have a conversation about homicide that's honest, the first thing we have to do is pat ourselves in the back for having a homicide rate that's so low. All right. Right? You know what I mean? Yeah. But nobody's doing that. Like the blue media won't mention that, and the red media won't either. And when I put that article out, it got no traffic. And that was really surprising to me, because this is it's almost conspiracy theory level stuff. Like, why would nobody know this? And if you try and bring this up to somebody, they'd say, those numbers can't be right. You must have cooked those numbers. I grabbed them off the FBI website. Mm-hmm. Oh, and there was almost no research involved in that, right? But nobody knows that. Why doesn't anybody know that?
Well, okay, so it's because nobody wants to tout that, because that doesn't feed into agendas. That's the obvious thing.
Well, I think that might be part of it, but I think there's something deeper going on, because it's like, you can claim that all media is agenda driven by politics, and that's an easy claim to make, and you can rattle that saber, and I don't think it's necessarily true. There is one overwhelming agenda that all media has, and that's to keep the lights on. Yeah. It's to make money. Yeah. Right? And the way you make money now is with clicks. And the way you get clicks is by making people scared.
Yeah. Yeah. There used to be an adage that if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. But the media is, if they're not outraged, they're not paying attention. And so we need to get them outraged.
Right. Right. So it's like
anything that tells you to chill out is by definition not something that's going to gain traction in the way that it's set up now.
Nobody shares chill out. So this is what I discovered when I went across this whole series of articles, is that any articles that I wrote that were useful in a culture war argument on Facebook got a tremendous amount of secondary sharing. And that's where almost all my traffic came from. Right? You get, if it hit Facebook and Tumblr and, these sorts of things, then it was like they got a huge number of hits.
So it's not necessarily the media, quote unquote, the media's fault that this is the way things operate. It's more about human attention. The media is attenuated to human attention.
First off, you got to keep the lights on. And so what you have to do is you have to come up with a way to incite and enrage the public in any way you can. And that's how you get more clicks. And so that's how you make your money, and then you bank it, and then you wake up the next morning and then you do the same thing. You find out some way to enrage people and you try and make a little bit more money. And all of the media is doing that. But here's the problem. It's like nobody can stop doing that, even if they wanted to. Like, CNN or whoever. We'll pick on them because it's fun to pick on CNN, or we can pick on Vox because they do the same thing, or Fox. We could call them the Vox and Fox. If they stopped trying to incite and enrage the public,
they would be irrelevant immediately.
Right. They would lose traffic to somebody else who was doing it. Yeah. They would lose market share. Right. So they can't stop, because if they stop, then somebody else who doesn't stop will get the money. So you're stuck. The whole thing is intractified so that it must keep peddling, freakoutery. Yeah. And that's why I named the thing Hand Waving Freakoutery when I finally picked like a publication name, because that's really what this thing is all about, right? Yeah. It's like this is the problem, is that everybody is stuck doing this. And you talked about attention spans. This is another article I did later on, and this is kind of more down the culture war rabbit hole thing. What's going on really is you've got kind of this tragedy of the commons situation with the media. You're familiar with tragedy of the commons.
Let's walk through that for everybody.
Let's walk through it just in case anybody who's listening is not familiar. So I believe, I could be wrong about this, and if so, flog me, but I believe the tragedy of the commons was originally framed around farming in England, like where they had this common area where you could graze your sheep, Yeah. And the problem was that, if I had 5 sheep and you had 5 sheep and there was, 10 sheep worth of space to graze, then we were good. But then if you got 7 sheep, then, there was nothing for me then I got to get 7 sheep too. And then and then you got to get 8 sheep and I got to get 10 sheep, and then there's no more grass, and then we're yelling at each other, right? Yeah. You end up extracting all of the shared resource for your own personal gain. And it has to do with this kind of like the boundary conditions of the game theory of sheep grazing. This is before game theory was really described, but they called it the tragedy of the commons back then. And then how do you fix that? It's like, well, you need the Bureau of Land Management to make sure that you have a limit on how many sheep people get. You need sheep grazing permits, whatever, that kind of thing. So that's the tragedy of the commons, and that's often trotted out as one of the most, I would say, legitimate criticisms of pure libertarian thought, right? Okay. Yeah. Because if you just turn the thing loose and everybody's grabbing everything, you're like, this is a big deal in water resources, which is my field. Mm-hmm. It gets into the like everybody was bitching at Nestle for taking too much water when California had the drought or whatever. All that's tied up with water rights law, which is on the East Coast, I don't know how to deal with that very much, but that's kind of where that comes from.
But it's an example of where the libertarian ideas break down.
I think so. So. And as somebody who's kind of I'm a libertarian flag waver. If we were, cohesive enough to have a flag, I would wave it, but we're not. Yeah.
Well, I would never tread on your flag. I'll just let you know.
So we have a fixed number of people in the country, right? Okay. And each of us only has so many hours per day that we can stay glued to our cell phone looking at news.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a fixed resource. When you just had, 3 or 4 TV shows or, major news networks or whatever, and that was it, it was not a big deal. Like they would go out and have normal news with Tom Brokaw, and he wasn't trying to freak you out necessarily. You just picked your normal news show and you moved on with your life. But now it's like you've got, you had cable news, and then you had more complicated cable news, and then once you got YouTube and Twitter and podcasts and everybody started getting stuff online instead of like reading the newspaper, then you have effectively an infinite number of people trying to graze that attention span.
Yes,
it's like having an infinite number of sheep herders trying to squeeze onto the lot, right? So the only way that they can get there is by so first thing you can do, you can shorten your articles, right? Because then you can get a click in less time.
Mm-hmm.
You can freak people out about, like, you can increase their anxiety, or you'll do other things, like you'll have stories that talk about that peddle envy. Like, look how rich this guy is, whatever. So that's your celebrity
feed upon
stuff.
the easiest emotions.
Like, really, if you break it down, it comes down to like 3 main things. It's like, doesn't just encapsulate what the media is doing, but also what people are doing on social media, because we're all doing this. Like when you're on Facebook, you're self-publishing.
Yes.
Right. And when you're on Twitter, you're self-publishing, and you're trying, and you're
exploiting yourself even.
Well, yeah, you're cruising for the likes, and the reason you're cruising for the likes is because you get a dopamine fix when somebody likes your stuff, right? And dopamine is like the same thing that gets you high from gambling or smoking or drinking, the 3 pillars of a fun Saturday night. And you get addicted to self-publishing, and you want people to encounter, you want to get the upvotes, you want to get whatever it is, from Reddit or that kind of thing. And so your posts, and this is in profit media and also in, personal publishing, which is what social media is. It's like, it breaks down to like, look how great my life is, picture, right? Like, look at me on a beach, or like, look how terrible the world is. So this is like Trump or Hillary or racialism or privilege or whatever, And then your third thing is kind of, look at all these rich motherfuckers, where you have like Caitlyn Jenner or Elon Musk or the Queen of England or all these kind of things. And then you have sort of general freakoutery. But like those 3 categories, which is how social media plays, they're like, those 3 things create a false picture of the world.
Yes.
Okay. And they create a
but
picture
it's a vivid
of the world.
Picture.
It is a vivid, beautiful picture of the world as being full of resources that other people have.
Yes. And
that your resources are less than their resources, which activates the sort of resource scarcity neurons in your brain. And this is a Brett Weinstein thing. You ask Brett about this because it's something he was talking about on Rogan. And so when your brain has this perception that you're in a resource scarce position, even when you're not in a resource scarce position, you tribe up. Because that's what the tribes used to do back in the old times. Like, it's like, if you've got a tribe of 100 farmers, and then 10 miles down the road there's another tribe of 100 farmers, and there's like, or hunter gatherers, and you only got so many banana trees, but you got enough bananas for everybody. You're friendly with the tribe next door. But if like suddenly there's a banana drought, well, you got to make sure you get those bananas, so that those other guys, they can't get those bananas, right? So then you got to, what do? You end up with war and stuff. You end up with violence, and the sort of your latent, ape programming to shift into things like, into modes like war and genocide, starts to make more sense.
Yeah, but so far it's purely virtual. Like, we're playing at war. It's a disembodied war. And it's a war over opinions, and so it starts to play with the resources of opinions, which is language, which is the main thing that I critique. When I critique popular culture, I go down to the language, and I show how people are using words, because that's what people are battling over. At least one contingent. The progressives are pretty. That's what usually what they end up fighting over is the words, is the framing and stuff like that. But that's because if you can shape the language, then you can shape the attention, and then you gain more supporters, you gain more of tribe, or you gain more righteousness, which means that
I think that's a legitimate point. And one of the things that I think I've seen, and a lot of people who are like in this sort of trying to analyze the culture war space is they're definitely taking an epistemological approach, right? They're like trying to unpack what are the source beliefs of this, tribe versus that tribe, and how they're using language and how they're doing this, and how these things fit together or fall apart. And, for me, it's like
there's another layer.
I'm less worried about that seems like details to me. That kind of seems like who's shooting at who in this virtual thing. Like, I'm a lot more worried about why it's cropping up in the first place.
Okay.
What's the incentive, you know? And I think the incentive is just is the media banging into echo chambers to try and get clicks.
Yeah.
And making people anxious and driving their sort of latent programming to tribe up, because that's what happens when you feed these echo chambers. You people get more and more self-righteous, and they are more and more likely to exclude or disbelieve other people based on a tribal affiliation and that kind of thing. And you're starting to see it now in polling data. People are there's a significant number of blue tribers and red tribers right now that are would get very angry at their children if they married someone from the opposite tribe. kind of like white and black used to be in the 1950s or whatever. Guess who's coming home for dinner? You could remake that movie or whatever with a Republican and a Democrat if you wanted to. Or now,
absolutely,
and it might even be nastier. Know. So,
but we've already covered that the media itself isn't to blame. The media is driven by the need to keep the lights on. So the media is shaping itself. Oh, it's a business model flaw. So is there a way for the model of media to actually be new media? There's this phrase new media, which just means the internet. But I wonder if there's an actual new media of the way that we interact with information that doesn't feed into this whole tribalistic echo chamber line. I've
been working on that for a long time, dude. It's really hard thing to try and puzzle out, because on the surface it almost seems to me like the answer is no. There's no way out of this trap. And I've thought about it for a long time. The only thing I can think of is that somebody's going to have to come along and reinvent a new social media platform. It's going to have to come from the private sector that is going to kick Facebook's table over. And people are going to have to want to migrate to it, and it's going to have to more closely emulate the ways we interact, or at least used to interact, in the real world, which is that if you want to have a conversation about something at a dinner table, you invite 3 people over to dinner, and then you have that conversation with them without having a bunch of TV cameras all shining in on it and broadcasting it out to a horde of people that might disagree with you, right? It's like when you have a conversation on Twitter, it's like, okay, here's me and 5 people that are having an interesting conversation on Twitter. However, there could be 100 people who all, disagree, just farming it for some kind of, nugget they can use against you in the future or something weird like that.
I don't know. It seems like you want mass communication that doesn't have the capacity of being mass communication.
I think that we need to return to talking like we used to talk.
Which is contained.
You're right.
Which doesn't slip out of some sort of lane or group of people that you consciously select.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like you've got a lot of people. The sort of millennial generation and younger generations is social media has been your thing for forever. And middle Gen X, I'm in my early 40s. And, I was kind of into this stuff before this stuff was even almost stuff. I was using dial-up bulletin systems with a 1200 baud modem and talking to people through a hard drive on somebody else's, house, right? Okay, it's like War Games, with Matthew Broderick. I was doing that crap when I was 12 years old. So I've been around it for a while, and people are like, "Oh, we're on Facebook. It's this totally new thing." I'm like, "What the hell is it?" And I looked at it, I was like, "Oh, it's a discussion forum." Yeah, okay, I've seen those. And it's like I've been doing that since I was a kid, guys. What's so special about it? And the special thing about it apparently is that you could get your grandma on it, and and then you can share cat photos with your cousins, and that was kind of what it was for a while. And then it became a way to completely alienate your cousins who just want to look at cat photos by sharing your political beliefs, right?
Yeah, that's I wonder if that infection was inevitable or if it has something to do with what's going on outside of the internet.
I don't think that there are hostile forces that caused this thing to turn sour. I think it was just kind of inevitable that it was going to turn sour because, one of the things that we had, look at the United States as a country, we have a vast, huge territory. And we have vastly different people scattered all across that territory with vastly different opinions, vastly different views. And before the, advent of social media, all of these people were kind of contained, right? It's like you didn't run into a whole lot of people who are vastly different than you are, right? You were just kind of dorked on along and in different regions of the country kind of had their personal views about different stuff and then that was fine. And when you would only get into a major disagreement if it turned out that you had a huge problem with the views or the behavior or whatever of your next door neighbor, Yeah. And then what social media did is said, hi, I'm going to make everybody your next door neighbor.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So there's a proximity thing now. All the proximity has been removed. And so any kind of buffer between opposing views has been completely stripped away.
When you brought up that everybody is your neighbor now, it just reminds me of the Christian morality, where everybody is the same in the sight of God. And this is just Christian language. I'm not foisting it on anybody, but according to the teachings of Jesus, everybody is a child of God. We're all the same in God's sights. Therefore, we're all neighbors. Therefore, we all need to respect and cherish and feel compassion towards everybody else. I wonder if one of the ways of managing our translation from these little pockets of tribes scattered all over the place with tons of space collapsed into thousands and thousands, millions, billions of people from thousands of tribes collapsed into the same space is not if the solution isn't a values solution rather than, breaking off from that commons area.
Gee, that sure would be nice. I'd love that. I mean,
a gentleman's agreement about treating people in a certain way.
I mean, love thy neighbor is like a perfect meme to run a society around.
Yeah.
Okay. Whether you like or dislike Christianity. I was raised a Quaker.
Oh, awesome.
And and it's a fascinating sect of Christianity, and I love a lot of the teachings within it. And I don't practice it anymore, currently, but there's a lot of it has stuck with me throughout my life. And Darwinism is such a sharp knife; you can use it on anything. It's the one thing that frustrates me about I started consuming a lot of Brett Weinstein, Heather Heying stuff over the past year. And it frustrates me sometimes that they don't use it enough on stuff that's outside genes. So you can use it on religion. You could say, all right, let's say there's 1,000 different religions across the world, right? And then the religions that did not do as well died out, and the religions that did well lived on. And what does doing well mean? It means conveying appropriate memes for running society, right?
Yeah.
And so the stronger, more stable societies lived on and such, and that what has lived out, what has won out, is like golden rule stuff, right? The golden rule shows up in everything that's running nowadays. Now, I might say that, well, that some of that had to do with colonialism or whatever. I don't necessarily, I'm not a good enough religious historian to know whether the Aztecs had the golden rule, for instance, and but I am a good enough historian to know that the Spaniards didn't necessarily take over Mexico by having better societal memes. They took over Mexico with smallpox blankets and guns. So it's like, but at the same time, had that not happened, would the Aztec version of society lived out? I don't necessarily think so, because I think that what's going right now, the ones that make the world work the best currently, and 85% of the world's religious is stuff that's got golden rule baked in, or some version of it. And so, it'd be nice if we could try to rebake the golden rule and give it to and re-indoctrinate people in the United States to it. And I think that we might have lost that,
Well, you know what? Following Darwinian logic, insofar as we don't bake certain virtues into our social media and into our media, it will eventually lead to collapse. It will eventually lead to tribalism, to internecine conflict, and collapse. So, so it might be smart to put your eggs in the basket of internet communities that have core values that will survive, or not lead you into, just wailing all the time and chasing after envy, chasing after, vanity. And what was that third thing? Look at how good I am. Look at how bad the world is.
Look how great my life is. Look how terrible the world is. And look at all these rich motherfuckers. Right. That's pretty much it. Let's dial it 4 steps back, because if I go too much further down this, I'm going to end up like crossing upwards and jumping ahead. So when I started looking at this cultural analysis stuff, I was like, I've been sequestered. I'm not like an academic that's looking at this thing for a long time. I kind of had to develop my own tools. And when I did, I started looking at things like, okay, well, let's do a thought experiment. All right, what do you think sets mankind away from other species on the planet? You've got cities, you have division of labor, you have, social hierarchies, you have large scale cooperation to be able to achieve vast, civil infrastructure projects and things like that, to be able to make sure that everybody has the right stuff they need. You have agriculture. Agriculture is gigantic, right? That's super important. But then on the flip side, you've got all this bad stuff too. You've got like war, and you've got genocide. Yeah. And you know what I mean? Yeah. And you have slavery. Okay. So all the things that I just mentioned right now, the ants have every single one of them. Yeah. Right? They've got the cities, they've got the division of labor, they've got social hierarchies, they've got agriculture, they have slavery. Yeah. They steal other ants and make them into their slaves. They have war. Aphids even, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the aphids is more farming. That's not slavery. That's just agriculture. That's their livestock. Okay. And I've seen them in my garden. They do that. It's like wild watching them do it. And the aphid farming ants, they'll take aphid eggs and they'll hide them for the winter to make them safe. And when they go in to make a new colony, they'll bring aphid eggs with them. Yeah. It's just like farming. It's exactly like it. But they have war, and their wars are nasty. They have genocide. They make sure they get in and kill all the babies whenever they win a war. And so it's like when you take a step back and you look and you're like, holy shit, we're running an ant program. Yeah. With video games and dancing. We have like some other fluff on the side, but what makes our sort of society strong is how well they're able to emulate the ants. And that's creepy. That's a creepy realization. No, it's creepy. Yeah, it's very Borgian. Right? Yeah. But it's like, wait a minute. Well, and you ask yourself, well, how do the ants do it? Well, if you ask an entomologist, well, how do the ants know what to do? Because you'll have one ant that he just spends his entire life carrying waste up from like some chamber up to the top and then dumping it off, and he makes 6 trips his whole life before he dies because his ant legs are worn out. How does he know to do that? Because he's not getting central instructions. There's no there's a queen, but the queen doesn't have a hive mind. There's no like radio and whatever like that. And there's no central organization of what the ants know when to do. All they're doing is just passing pheromone signals between each other. Yeah. So like if an ant is walking down the street and he hears the signal of, we need a new nursery pheromone, like from 10 prior ants, then he goes off to the side of the ant colony and he starts digging a hole, and then 5 other ants come along because they heard the same pheromone, and they dig their nursery out, and then some other ants are there to go and start building their nursery for their ant eggs and that kind of thing. Yeah. And so, well, that's how the ants do it. Like, how do we do that? Well, it's incentivized, right? Right. How do you get your signal that we need a new nursery, that we need a new daycare center? How do we get our signal for that? Well, it's abstracted. Yeah, money. Yeah, it's abstracted, which is just money is a pheromone. Money is our ant pheromone. Yeah. Flat. That's what it is. That's what I do. Okay, I take in money for the task that I do, and then I pay money out for another task. I get my food. I pass them some money. They pass the money to whoever makes the milk, or whatever, and they know that they need to keep making milk because they keep getting money for doing it. We're apes, where half of our behavior is programmed, and like we're not a blank slate, but we're blanker than most other animals or all other animals. We have some space in there, and that space can be filled, and it gets filled with indoctrination. So when you're kids, and as you're brought up, you're indoctrinated by your parents, and you are educated by your educational system, and you gather behavior from your peer interactions, and that becomes your framework with which you set up a bunch of basically a bunch of operating scripts in your head, right? Like you hold the door for a lady. Why do you don't sit there and think about whether it's the appropriate thing to do to hold the door for a lady? You just do it, or you do her in this area of the country. I don't, and or you don't push grandma down the stairs. But you don't have to stop and think, am I supposed to push grandma down the stairs or not? No, you just don't do it.
Yeah.
So you have these things that are built into your head, and then they help you run. They help you work your life so that you don't have to do so much thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
And those become a nested layer of behaviors, of indoctrinated behaviors. Mm-hmm. And that's the infrastructure of a culture, is that. Yeah. Like that was my analysis framework. I'm like, so cultures are nested layers of behavior that have been indoctrinated since birth, and that when two people show up and interact that have different nested layers of indoctrinated behaviors, possibly from different sources, that's where all the friction seems to occur. And so this culture war itself, it's like you're trying to think about it in terms of language, and I'm trying to think about it in terms of indoctrinated behavior. I don't want to say it's like the NPC meme, but it is kind of like the NPC meme.
Yeah,
but
maybe not
it's
completely
more like,
gray.
Maybe not. Well, it's more like, okay, everybody's mostly gray. Right.
Some people are more purple, some people are more orange, but like everybody's kind of
right,
gray.
Exactly. It's like most people spend most of their day not really thinking about stuff. Mm-hmm. And then if you run into somebody who's running a different meme or saying something that's different, that doesn't fit your indoctrinated meme spread, that challenges you because you don't want to have to think. You just think, well, that's not right. That's not how I was raised, right? Yeah. And so, or how I was taught or whatever. I see that kind of behavior on both sides of the gun debate.
Yeah, exactly.
People defaulting to basic stuff just because that's how they've been indoctrinated and they don't want to think deeply about what's going on with it.
If you overuse the NPC meme, you're just the NPC that generates the NPC meme, right?
Sure.
That becomes a part of your programming.
Now let's try and apply that model to the culture war. And what you see is it's more like, okay, red and blue doesn't really work great, and Democrat, Republican doesn't really work great, and neither does liberal or conservative, but like progressive traditionalist is a really good break. Because, traditionalists they have memes that have been around for a long time, and they like those memes that have been around for a long time because they know they work. They are proof-tested memes. And then you have like the progressives they don't like the traditional memes. The traditionals are like, these memes make the anthill go. Yeah. Why are we going to mess with these memes that make the anthill go? And then the progressives are like, well, they might be something like, well, I don't want to be an ant. Or they might just say, well, these memes make you better at the anthill than me, or whatever. We got to get rid of these memes. Or, you get into sort of your postmodernist analysis, treating everything in the world as a meta narrative, and then your social justice folks are more like all meta narratives are bad, without kind of realizing that social justice itself is also basically a meta narrative. Yeah. So they want to throw every traditional meme out, and this freaks the traditionalists out, because I think they might have a little bit better understanding about the sort of Darwinistic element here. Because if you wreck your meme, if you wreck your set of indoctrinated behaviors, and then some other society next door, they're running a set of behaviors that works because, say, they've been proof tested, well, they might come in and take over, just like an ant colony would.
The traditional wants to preserve the meme that works. The progressive wants to be aware that at any moment, a meme that has worked will cease working because the environment is constantly changing. But
I think that some of the progressives nowadays aren't. I think they're throwing tradition out just for the sake of throwing it out.
Well, yeah, it's hard to know what's signal and what's noise. If that's just what we pay attention to, or if that's an actual emergent, if that's an anecdote or actual data. But what concerns me with the academic landscape is that it seems to be so full of people who are in principle against Western society just because it's dominant. They're operating under anything that's dominant is inherently evil, and they want to dominate that, which doesn't make sense, but they want to dominate it with something that's non-dominant because that's better. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't know, like a lot of people that are kind of weighed into this kind of tiny corner of the culture war, the sort of like social justice stuff, which I've spent a lot of time thinking about recently. They're really worried about, so the social justice crowd taking over academia and this and that. And I can see why they're worried, but, I have sort of a broader, maybe more dismal, maybe more futurist view of the thing. And I think it's kind of like, it's almost kind of, I hate to say it, but I guess I'll just say it. I think it's a waste of time to worry about what's happening in the universities because they're all going to go belly up in 15 years anyway. I mean, I think higher education is going to get majorly screwed in the next 15 years because it hasn't stayed up with the times as far as, delivery modes of their product. And it's not worth the money. And there's way too much money being thrown at it, and the student loan thing was kind of a sham from the beginning. Like, I mean, you kind of like student loans have kind of been a part of your framework probably since you've been ever thinking about college, but they kind of became a big deal originally, like when I was in college. And it was like, before I went to college, it was like when you went to college, it was because your parents paid for college, right? Or they got a loan, and it wasn't like a federally backed student loan. It was like they took out a second loan on their house to get enough money to send you to college, and they'd send you to the college that they could afford to send you to, right? That was just how it worked. And along came this idea of the federally backed student loan program. And what it basically did was, I mean, it had a good intent. Yeah. And the intent that it did achieve, in that there was there were folks that could have gotten good doctor, lawyer, engineer jobs that were poor folks that couldn't afford to go to college, right? And so you want to try and get those guys online. You want to try and provide them the upward mobility that they have. And the student loan program absolutely did that. But the cost was that everybody went and got a college degree.
Yeah. You leveled the playing field, but at the same time flooded the playing field.
Right. Well, the big problem is that everybody said this is going to pay for itself because everybody's going to go and be able to get a college level job now. But we ballooned the number of diplomas, but we did nothing to change the job profile in the United States. We still need the same number of garbage collectors and plumbers and baristas that we needed before. It's just now the baristas have college degrees. Yeah. And debt. Right. and so it's like, in some ways, the poor folks who are able to get ahead and get into their professional college style careers, your engineers, doctors, lawyers, accountants, whatever, those people got ahead, surreptitiously on the backs of a whole bunch of other poor people going into debt. The way the program was set up.
That is pretty cynical, but it doesn't make it any less true.
That's pretty much what happened. And when it was extremely popular, like everybody in Congress voted for it. It's a big bipartisan thing. Everybody patted themselves on the back, and there's like, there's one angry dude in the back and gives an hour-long speech about why it's stupid. And, guess who that was? It was Ron Paul.
And, not Bernie this time, huh?
No, oh no, of course not Bernie. Bernie would have been for it. And so nobody listened to him because nobody ever listens to Ron Paul. And then what happened also was that meant that a whole bunch of baby boomers, they loved it because that means they didn't have to take out the loan or, mortgage their home to send their kids to school. They saved a bunch of money. And what do they do with the money? They bought a 6-bedroom house, which then fueled the housing boom through the 80s, really through the 90s and 2000s that led up to the housing crash in 2008, right? So in some ways, not only was the success of the poor people who could become, highly professional folks at the cost of the rest of the indebted poor, it was also at the cost of the markets themselves once the thing crashed because of the overvaluing of real estate and all of that, right? So, but what's happened since, so that money is still pouring into the colleges. The colleges are growing like way faster than they need to be. And what they're doing is they're taking as much money as they can from every student as they can, and they're pouring it largely into facilities upgrades, like bigger buildings and labs and dorms. And the dorms are so much nicer. Like when I went to college, you were like in a bunk bed, in a room. And now it's like everybody's got their own like granite countertop suite or whatever. And, your athletic complex is like the Club Med. I mean, it's like, modern universities are resorts. Yeah. Because they've got all this money and they're trying to spend it to try and entice more people to come and spend their debt there.
Yeah.
And
they spend a whole lot of money secondarily on pampering the students with a bunch of student life programs, which feature these weird, this is where we get this weird outcrop of equity and diversity and special rooms for every ethnicity and a lot of programs that make you feel good about yourself and that you're the center of the world. Like, it's not just physical. It's not just a physical. It's psychological. They're pouring a lot of money into making you feel like a pampered king psychologically.
Sure. Just like a resort would do in some ways. The millennials should be angry about their debt because they were sold a false bill of goods by their guidance counselors. Okay? Like, they were told, all you need is a college degree. Doesn't matter what the degree's in. Go get one. That's what they were told in high school. And they were too young to know that that was bad advice. Right? And the reason why the guidance counselors are telling them that is that the guidance counselors are under pressure to increase the number of people from their schools that get into college, right? And the reason why they're under that pressure is because then that's what their school ranking is based on in the public school rankings. And a higher ranked public school means that your home value goes up, and your home value, and so the school board wants, and that's where their money comes from, right? Their money comes from property taxes.
That's so shitty. That's so fucking dismal.
Are you starting to see how that whole thing's
It's
connected
just so satanic. It's just so like
I can't believe that this is, I haven't written this article yet. I'll eventually get around to writing it. I'd like to put some numbers to it, but that's basically what happened.
Oh, God.
Okay. And that's especially gets amplified with the whole housing market. Everybody's buying houses that are way too big and everything else like that. The whole thing just gets boiled up into this deal where there's so much money and so much, everything's all blooming into the universities. What you have now is you have people getting a $250,000 degree. The degree is basically just a hiring signal for your first job. Because once you've had a job, when you switch jobs, they don't look at where you went to college anymore. They look at where you worked last. Okay. And they look at how good you are at what you do. They're spending $250,000 on stuff, on a lot of times stuff that basically equates to a hobby and a hiring signal. As soon as somebody can figure out how to get that same hiring signal on the cheap that an employer will accept, all of the next generation is just going to completely bail, right? And as soon as they bail, the colleges themselves are going to be fantastically screwed because, you mentioned that they're pouring a lot of money into this sort of pampering of the students and stuff, and I'm sure they're doing that, but I bet if you looked at their balance sheet, the major money they're doing is in capital improvements. Yeah. Because buildings cost money, dude. I'm in land development. Buildings cost money. And even once it's built, you've got a carrying cost because you're usually building it with debt, right? So you got to pay that debt. And then you're also got to, you have operations and maintenance, you got all this kind of stuff. And if your whole facility empties, what do you do?
And then what's going to happen with all these people with debt? Is that going to lead to a revolution, you think? I want to
which people? Which people? Like the students or the students. Or the universities? Because they're going to have debt too. They've pulled out debt for their capital improvements. Yeah,
but they're corporations. Like that money will just be written off as some sort of insurance bankruptcy thing, right?
Right. Yeah, they'll go bankrupt, and whoever loaned them the money is going to lose their return, and so and then that could spill through and cause another kind of general market crash. That's what happened in 2008, right?
Okay.
It would be nice to say only the people who, defaulted on their loans took it on the chin, but that's not what happened. The people who loaned them the money took it on the chin. And then we found out, oh, wait, it was us that loaned them the money because all of our investments were rolled into these mortgage-backed securities by the banks. And so the banks are like, okay, well, your 401k took it. Right? That's how crashes work.
Okay, yeah.
And so that kind of thing is going to happen whenever this hits, and I don't think it'll be in 2 years. I think it could very well be in 12.
So we got sidetracked with the college thing, which was a lovely bunny event.
Well, let's bookend that. Let's wrap that up. The main reason why that I'm not personally kind of freaking out about the sort of social justice, gender studies program stuff, sort of the James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose triad, those guys are doing all that stuff right now. It's they're trying to restore this structure to the academia. They seem to me to be trying to plug holes in a leaky boat that's on its way towards a waterfall.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So I'm not that worried about that stuff. It's the
market will resolve it.
Oh yeah, that's going
Because
to get
it's
resolved.
worthless. Unless it has some worth, it will be completely dissolved in
That's
the crash.
that's how the system goes, man.
Yeah.
It's like
Okay.
worth is rewarded, and it will eventually
Huh.
that's every time it just takes a while
Huh.
to catch up sometimes. I view this as one particular battle in an overall culture war. And my fear is not necessarily about who gains control of the university. My fear is really more large scale. I'm afraid people are going to start shooting each other.
And
And
that's why
that's,
you want everybody to be armed.
yeah, now we're back to guns. All right, it took a long time to get back there. That's not necessarily why I want everybody to be. That's why I want to be armed, in
Yeah.
case everybody starts shooting each other. I want to be able to say, oh my God, well, okay, I got mine. Go over there.
Yeah.
Stay away from me.
How would you like the culture landscape to move towards a place or move in a direction that isn't all out war, that isn't people shooting themselves in the street? What are some methods that we can use in our daily lives that allay that possibility?
Uninstall Facebook.
Okay,
That's
so
step.
just
That's
step.
absolutely step one. You got to get rid of Facebook, and you got to get rid of these sorts of signal amplifiers. And the second thing you got to do is you got to stop listening to news. Like everybody's got to realize that the news is in it for the clicks. And if you understand that every time you read a news story, somebody profited from you clicking on it, and that you followed it for a reason, which is probably a headline that was probably designed very carefully to get you to click on it, and that the content in it is developed not necessarily to convey meaning to you or even to challenge you. The content is intentionally created to get you to share it. It's commercials. We have developed a very thick skin in our heads against commercials in the United States because we watched commercial TV for so long. We know that when the commercial comes on, we ignore the Fruit Loops, right? We don't care about the Rice Krispies. We're like, yeah, whatever. It's just a commercial. And then the cable news comes back on, and we start paying attention, and we've forgotten that stuff. We've been trusting that stuff is not a commercial.
Huh. Okay.
But it is. And whether it's the blues or the red, it's either a blue commercial or a red commercial. And
But doesn't that shoot yourself in the foot? Like to
Why?
say, as a communicator, you're somebody who communicates,
Sure.
to say people should stop paying attention to communication. Don't we need to somehow instigate an evolution of being able to parse data between what's a commercial and what's sincere, valuable data?
Yeah.
Are you advocating just complete unplugging, like a Luddite?
Well, I think
modality?
that would be the safest thing to do. And I think that if you do plug in, you need to make sure you're very critical of everything you need to be critical about.
Okay.
Like everything, especially if you agree with it. If you read
So
something
either
you agree with it,
unplug or become completely paranoid.
I don't know that being critical is necessarily
Okay.
paranoia, but the stuff you need to be critical the most about really is the stuff that feeds you something you agree with. Because if you agree with it, chances are it's more likely that it was designed for you to share it, and then here we go, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And then you're contributing to the echo chamber problem. You're amplifying a signal. Is it right? I mean, there's so much gun stuff that I went, and debunked. It was like one article after this, debunk that, debunk the other. I mean, the first article was about, are you aware that there's no bivariate correlation whatsoever between gun ownership and gun homicide rate?
What's bicorrelate?
Bivariate. If you plot gun ownership on the y-axis and gun homicide rate on the x-axis, or vice versa, there is no correlation. None. Not in the United States, not internationally, not among developed countries, not among European countries. Nowhere is there a bivariate correlation. And there is some buried multivariate correlation sometimes, but it is way less impactful than things like Gini coefficient. And
so what does that mean?
What do you mean?
What does it mean that there's no bivariant correlation between ownership and homicide?
Okay, so like Vox or Mother Jones or Every Time for Gun Safety are going to put up this graph, and it's going to have a whole bunch of data points. It's going to have a line going through it, and it's going to say, see, look, the more guns there are, the more gun homicides there are. Right? I think I read a big article about that, and each of those things that I just mentioned has written those articles over and over and over again. Let's say, look, more gun homicides, whatever, and they have the graphs, and they look right. And then if you pay really close attention to the y-axis, they're not measuring gun homicides, they're measuring gun deaths. And what they've done is they sneak in suicides and accidents into the graph.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. So gun accidents are absolutely related to gun ownership because you can't have a gun accident without a gun. And gun suicides are, and I wrote a whole second article to unpack the gun suicide issue. They are related to gun ownership rate. But this is curious. Only in men. Like gun ownership versus gun suicide versus total suicide. Really, that's the best way to look at it. There's no relationship among women because I guess like the women are worried about who's going to clean up the mess or something, right? But like men are hastier and male, suicides are angrier, and so what happens is that they're more violent, and so when men make that leap and happen to have a gun around, it's more likely to work, right? I mean, and so there is a correlation between gun ownership in men and gun suicide rates in men, which is also strange because like that's like if you could get just every man who has suicidal thoughts to give his gun to a friend, if you could just do that one thing, you would save something like 50% of the total gun deaths in the country. Because gun suicide is 2/3 of gun deaths. 2/3.
Wow.
And 7/8 of that 2/3 are men.
Yeah.
The gun deaths problem is a men's health problem.
Yeah.
But that does not play in the blue media.
Yeah.
Because nobody's, no feminists are going to march on Washington for men's health. And no, because that doesn't fit the narrative. But men aren't going to march on Washington for men's health because they look like a bunch of pussies, right? So nobody wants to talk about that. But that's the actual problem behind gun deaths right there. If you want to define gun deaths as your problem, that's the problem, and nobody wants to talk about it. Golly, like if the NRA were to realize this, maybe they do, maybe they don't care. I don't know. They're kind of like just a Republican shill organization right now. But if they were to realize that and they were to have like a giant sort of suicide awareness thing among their members, just to, hey, give your gun to a buddy if you're having bad thoughts, just something like that was just kind of permeated their literature, they could probably save 5 times the number of lives per year as total number of domestic violence deaths. There's that big of a difference in the numbers.
Okay.
It's tremendous. It's like wow. It's huge.
So when we look at the facts like that, how do you publish those facts? How do you incentivize the sharing of a fact like that? Something that stands in direct opposition to our nature.
Got me, dude. That was what I was running into when I was writing these things. I that was okay. So the suicide article was Article 2. The no bivariate correlation was Article 1, and it got picked up. God, dog, somebody threw that article up on like the Donald on Reddit. I didn't put it there, and it got a huge amount of traffic from that. And then the third article was about, hey, look, there's actually no homicide epidemic. Nobody read that article. And then, what was the fourth article? Was looking at buybacks. Like, would a buyback work? And it's like the mathematics on that just don't work. They're impossible because, first off, like Australia's buyback, it didn't get all their guns. They got I can't remember what it was, like 40% of their guns or something like that.
Okay.
And in order to get us down to where Australia's numbers are, we'd have to reclaim like over 90% of the guns in the country because we start with so many more guns than they have.
Yeah.
Mathematically speaking, 40% of the guns in the world today are in the hands of U.S. citizens.
So then what do you think all the ink spilled about the gun debate is really about? Other
it's about
than
driving
selling
anxiety.
Kicks. Okay.
Driving anxiety, getting clicks. That's it.
Huh.
That's it. That's all of the and that's and it's really on the red side too, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. Holy crap! So you ever heard of a guy named Kurt Schlichter? Mm-hmm. He's a conservative pundit, writes for townhall.com.
Yeah.
He's just like he's read Culture War. Democrats coming to kill you. All this kind of a communist, just that and the other. He makes a lot of money peddling clicks, right? He got somebody tweeted him my article on the that you mentioned originally, the one about the
preppers.
The surprisingly solid mathematical case of the tinfoil hat gun prepper. Somebody sent him that article. And he's like, "This article is great," and I was like watching him on Twitter, and I was like, "Oh no, here it comes." And he wrote an article that was long and complicated that continually referenced my article and quoted it and cited me, and it was nice to be cited, but he was like, I told you guys, math says that everyone should buy an AR-15 rifle. And I'm like, oh shit, god damn it, this is like the exact opposite of what I was going for. Like trying to explain people that, like, hey, some of us are kind of worried that, like, the preppers aren't prepping to, like, fight the government. They're worried about, like, protecting their rice while a bunch of other people try and, take over the government, or people fight over it or whatever. And the preppers aren't prepping for war. They're prepping for survival while other people war.
Well, given all that you've said about the misuse of the information that you provide, and that any information that you provide that goes viral only goes viral insofar as it feeds into anxiety, are you going to stop putting out information?
I don't know, man.
Or do you want to figure out how to sculpt information?
Well, it was kind of why I shifted over to sort of this culture war analysis stuff. Is like, one of the things I wanted to do was, like, I put my tag up on Medium that I was a conscientious objector to the culture war, and I am. I don't like it. I think it's stupid. I think it's going to drive people to shoot each other, but the only way you can figure that out is to, like, analyze it, like try and figure out why it's happening. Yeah. And so that's where my head's been at right now. Yeah. And the other thing too is that I spend too much time thinking, and I get too deep on some of these thoughts, and I can't sleep until I get them down on paper.
You just give your gun to your buddy.
I'm not at all suicidal. I have 2 kids, man.
All right. It's a bad joke.
Yeah. But hey, this is one thing to say. If you have any viewers and any of them are suicidal and they have a gun in their house, give it to a buddy. Seriously. If one person does that out of your entire YouTube channel, then your entire existence as a YouTube broadcaster will be, like, vilified, or whatever the right word is. All right. Because that's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big deal. And
but the cultural war is more nefarious.
I think that the culture war is eventually going to lead to people, like, as people continue to tribe up, these things turn into violence eventually. Like, think about it this way. If there's a cliff and you are steadily walking towards the cliff and you cannot change course, all you can do is speed up or slow down. You're going to hit the cliff eventually. You're going to fall off of that cliff eventually. And the cliff in this case is people shooting each other. What would a civil war and, a second civil war in the United States look like? Like, I was talking about this kind of stuff in March. I got a tremendous amount of shit from people. Oh, this is all bullshit. Vox writes this big thing. Oh, people need to stop writing about the second civil war. And then, God dog, Ezra Klein dropped something like 2 days ago, was like, we're in a second civil war right after the midterms. Like, while you were editor of Vox, you were saying not to do that. All right, whatever.
Well, okay, yeah, whatever.
He's like, oh, okay. Right. Well, this is what's getting the clicks today, Yeah. And but what it would probably end up looking like is some kind of low-grade conflict where people ended up, it's kind of a continuous running shooting thing. But it doesn't take very many people, like the entire Syrian civil war, which is a god-awful, horrible thing. Only 1% of the population of Syria are combatants. Right? I was reading something really recent on a blog. It's a sort of a conservative, this is a popular conservative gun blog called Forward Observer. And this is kind of his shtick. He's looking at this, but he's looking at it tactically because the guy's a retired Marine intelligence guy. And it was actually kind of made me feel a little bit better about the thing because, we've got a rise in political violence going on right now. The hot button one was all of the mail bombs, right? Yeah. But like a month before the mail bombs, there was a bunch of ricin bombs that were sent to Republicans, and then you had there's some Democrats shot up a Republican campaign office in Florida, and then there was there's stuff going on both sides of it right now. But the thing that's kind of nice that he pointed out that I hadn't fully thought about, I just kind of been looking like, is the violence increasing? He said the thing you got to look at is that as long as it's lone wolves, it's not a war. Okay. It's just a bunch of idiots. And there might be more idiots, and the idiots might increase, and that might be a bad thing, but it's not a war. Where you see a war is the best way to identify that is T3R, which is tooth-to-tail ratio. Because like the Army loves their acronyms, right? And a tooth-to-tail ratio is how many support staff per guy with gun do you have in your setup, right? And I think the number he quoted was like modern Afghanistan operations have like a 30-to-1. Like there's 30 support staff of some kind or another in supply or intelligence or anything else that per single guy with gun that's instructed to kill people. I thought that was pretty high. But, that T3R is something that military historians used to measure, troop makeups in conflicts or whatnot. And they also used to measure the Taliban, right? Because the Taliban is not 1-to-1 either. Like somebody's giving them food and bullets and telling them where to go, and that kind of thing. And he says where you need to start to being worried is when some of these things start happening with support staff, right? Like Antifa's not there yet. Antifa's not really. I mean, I guess they're banging on Tucker Carlson's door or whatnot. But if they were throwing Molotov cocktails in the window, that would be a significantly different thing. Or if they were shooting somebody, that would be a different thing. And then you might end up in a situation where you have, if they were going to do that, it wouldn't be like, hey, let's get the crowd together and let's go harass Tucker Carlson. It'd be more like, we're going to pick this one guy and all 10 of us are going to run, interference for him and make sure he has the stuff he needs or something like that. You know what I mean? Then it would become more organized. And that's when you got to start looking at it. You got to start worrying. So we're not there yet. Everybody talks about civil war. We're not there yet. We're just like really angry.
Yeah, but you use the metaphor of walking toward a cliff. You think it's inevitable. Yeah. There's no way to turn. There's just a slow or a fast getting there.
If I don't see any way the media can turn around, because whoever turns around loses market share, right?
Yeah, so all you can do as somebody who is feeding into the media is introducing drag to the progress.
Yeah, I guess maybe so. I don't know. I'm not, well, okay. Here's the thing. I can say whatever I want to because I'm not trying to pay the bills, right? So maybe amateur media is the way to rescue this thing. I make basically nothing off Medium. It pays some grocery bills on occasion. But the people who are trying to make money and have like a full-time job, and they have a company that they got to, maybe they even have stockholders or whatever. Those people can't turn around because if they turn around, they lose market share.
Yeah.
That's the thing that freaks me out is that the business model as it's set up right now has no way to turn away from that cliff. It must step towards the cliff because it's a tragedy of the commons issue, like we're talking about kind of at the beginning. You know what I mean? That's what scares me. It scares the nuts out of me. And ever since I finished up the gun, like the article, the gun series articles, I started looking at the traffic and paying attention to which ones played and which ones didn't and started to figure out why. And then Kurt Schlichter picked that article up and ran with it. And I saw why he did that. And I started to really see kind of how these, arms dealing in the culture war is what they're doing. That's what the media's job is. They're arms dealers. And now that I see how that works, it's like if your money comes from arms dealing, it's like you can't stop selling arms.
Yeah.
And so that's what scares me more than anything else. It's like I see I see kind of what's going on with the academia thing and I see that kind of stuff, and that's an interesting thing. I don't think anybody in that is going to end up start shooting each other.
Yeah, no.
I think in the overall thing
on Twitter, but
yeah, but see, the neat thing about Twitter, everybody's freaking out about like getting Twitter mobbed.
Yeah.
I keep wondering what I would do if I got Twitter mobbed, and I know what I'd do. I'd turn my phone off. Oh no, It's like,
I wonder if there's a business model for instead of selling arms, you sell flowers, but flowers with thorns in them. Just enough blood is going to be leaked from these things that it's not a car crash, but it's enough blood for everybody to look at. I'll look at that paper cut.
Yeah, the other thing about Twitter is it's so full of bots anyway. How do you even know the mob is real? Yeah. You could hire a Twitter mob if you were, if you got some money. I mean, both Hillary and Trump, most of their, not most, I think it was I read it was 15% for one and 20 or 25% for the other were of their total tweets were literally robots. Both of them were doing it. I don't even know a Twitter mob is real.
Yeah.
People are uninstalling their Twitter because they're afraid of getting bad comments.
Those comments were designed to be bad.
Yeah, they were. Why not? Or maybe you can make the Twitter mob become ineffective by monetizing Twitter mobs. There's an interesting free market idea. If you could build yourself build a botnet with 1,000 Twitter accounts and then hire yourself out, and then once you get caught, then everybody may, oh man, this Twitter mob was fake. well, if that one's fake, maybe I'm not worried about the next one. Right? Like,
yeah, but you still have people like people with good ideas who you were talking about very beginning, Scott Alexander.
oh yeah.
Who still keeps below ground because he's scared of an actual backlash that it'll affect his job.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's.
I don't mean scared.
Well, okay, because he's not. Well, I mean, he just wants to make sure that he's insulated from any of that garbage. He doesn't even do Twitter anymore. I looked him up on Twitter. He hadn't tweeted in like half a year. And he just runs a website. The only thing that could possibly come back to him is a denial of service attack on his website. Like, oh no, I guess I'll reboot my website. Oh well.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And and by the way, definitely go look into that guy. That guy's he's smarter than me by a long shot.
Okay. Well, if you're smarter than me, then he's super smart then.
I don't know how smart I am, but I know that like it's like you go into online communities a lot of times, you can kind of take the lay of the landscape, and most of the time when I walk into them, I'm like, okay, there's a few people here that are really worth listening to, but most people are just full of garbage. And then you throw ideas out there, and half the thing I post on forums is stuff I don't even believe. I'm just kind of curious what people say. You know what I mean? And but if people who follow the community that's involved with Slate Star Codex, if they disagree about something, chances are really good I'm wrong, and I need to pay attention. And I really value that. I value that a lot.
So surround yourself with a community that can vet you and vet your ideas.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Try and hang around smarter people than you. It's really good practice. It's a really good practice.
Absolutely.